Hi, I'm Sai. Welcome to my channel called Nugget of Wisdom. In this video, I just want to talk about trust, because trust is probably one of the most difficult things to tie down in this world. And huge decisions are being made. And we're all being sort of canvassed and courted to sort of buy into somebody's morals. And those morals that we buy into, can we trust the people who are basically expressing the views, the rationale behind what they're doing based on those morals? And I would say trust is completely broken down in the world, especially at a political level. I think in my life, I don't think I've seen such a breakdown of trust. And I think the reason for it is that the internet has taken a few eyeballs that were easy to manipulate, and all the sides, when it came to propaganda and trying to convince people to go along with something, there were just a few eyeballs a few decades ago. There were a few mainstream media channels. Now, millions and millions and millions of people are watching everything all the time. And it's very difficult for anybody to do something that's untrustworthy without being caught out, without being seen as a hypocrite. So I also think that it's so global that it doesn't matter where you go, somebody will see what you're doing. And if you're doing something that is contradictory or is hypocritical, you will get caught out. And then it just breaks the trust that everybody assumed was kind of a fundamental building block of a society. And of course, the biggest issues in the world are wars, in my view. Wars can lead to terrible tragedies, the deaths of civilians and innocent people, destruction, and potentially could lead to terrible destruction of the world in World War III. These things are really important. And if you can't trust the people that are making decisions on your behalf, there's a real problem. But also there's a positive, because often that ushers in a completely new world. If you don't trust the existing people, the existing system that's giving you all of the information about the most serious things that our leaders in government are doing, then you just have a new system, you have new people. So it causes evolutions and revolutions. And I think the internet and the fact that so many people are watching everything now, and it's very difficult to do untrustworthy things and get away with it because you're seen. And lots of people are independently reviewing and analysing what's going on, and the words that are spoken, and the morals that are expressed, and all the stuff that leaders do to justify getting people on board to do the things they do, to start a war, to send weapons to a country, to make weapons, to expand their military, to take resources from another country, to stop other countries from doing certain things with sanctions and so on. I think those people now are being watched like hawks, and it's clear that no matter what country you're in, it's clear that decisions have been made in ways that are highly contradictory in many cases, because the motivations behind these decisions vary from the need for power, the need for money, the need to be part of a tribe, and the need to do the right thing. And they're all in conflict with each other most of the time. These contradictions become really visible, and then the people see this and they start to breathe a sigh of sadness and say, I don't really trust these people. The other interesting thing is that the wisest people in our world, the people who've got philosophy qualifications, psychology qualifications, and understand the evolution of human beings, and spiritual teachers, to me, they're often very muted and quiet. They talk about things in a general way, but they don't often get into the big issues and apply themselves to those big issues. Especially the religious traditions. The leadership of religious traditions often really don't get involved as much as I would have expected them to when it comes to serious issues that are going on in the world. And so that often makes it more difficult, because when you're looking for somebody to guide you, when you're looking for somebody to give you information about what might be the right path to take as an individual, how I perceive what my government might be doing when it comes to a war or getting into a battle or whatever it might be, giving weapons to somebody, who is it I can go to get that wisdom? How can I get that information so I can understand that the decision I make, and what's my decision? Well, probably it's maybe just down to just a vote, my vote, or writing a letter to my elected representative, or talking to my friend in a pub, or not watching something. But often, and especially now, I think people are pulling away because they're not getting clear guidance in an applied way about some of the things that are going on, the serious things like wars. And in all honesty, the politicians are so caught up in the mechanisms of the current shamocracy, which I call the democracy, but basically I call it democracy, because there's a lot of nonsense going on that has been around for generations, which relates to the need for political parties to get funding, get money, people's egos and having power and all that sort of stuff. Trying to access the resources of another place, get their oil, their gold, their lithium, whatever it might be, to sort of use in your own economy, and then use all sorts of moral arguments and try to be the pretend standard bearer for what's right in the world, so you can basically give the impression that you're the good guy, but actually while stealing things from the other country. And basically modern day Vikings. And that's really the problem we've got in the world. And of course, that lack of trust has the potential to cause all sorts of crazy things to happen, because the internet is 24 hours a day and everybody's watching everything that's going on. It becomes very, very visible that there's a serious problem with the way we express ourselves when it comes to the big decisions that are happening in the world. So here's just some examples applied today. I like to apply because I think it's really important to actually look at what's really going on now in 2024. So here's a really good example. Recently, some soldiers were killed. 3 soldiers were killed. American soldiers were killed in the Middle East at a base. And the US Army actually sort of retaliated, bombing some bases in Syria and Iraq, with the constant narrative that these groups, these militant groups, are all proxies of Iran. Very much the narrative, it's Iran. And this whole sort of, I would say, propaganda that somehow Iran is the enemy and Iran needs to be taken out. And you see that with senior people in the Republican Party and the standard legacy traditional media sort of pushing this narrative. What's really interesting is that from a spiritual point of view, the Americans retaliate to the deaths of 3 soldiers and a lot of injuries. I think it's 30 odd injured soldiers. And those people did the brave thing and went to war, got involved in the military and signed up, but they're soldiers. And basically that is potentially what happens in war. And I think if I was in the same situation, I would expect that I've made peace with the idea that at some stage I could be killed. And would there need to be retaliation? I don't know. I think, it's depends. But you see, in America, this is moralistic retaliation. Any of our boys get killed, we will retaliate. But what you also see at the same time is the deaths of thousands and thousands and thousands of civilians in Gaza. And the US political system and political leadership pretty much is ignoring it all. So that doesn't make sense to me, because from a spiritual humanitarian point of view, the deaths of 3 soldiers and the deaths of thousands of people, they're all the same to me. Especially, could almost argue that the deaths of thousands of children didn't get involved, didn't sign up to be in the military, didn't have a chance to think about the consequences of becoming a soldier. They're not soldiers, they're just children. And the lack of humanity that I see coming from the political leadership in the US tells me that there's a major problem with their consciousness. Because in reality, they would feel the pain and suffering for the deaths of anyone, because we're all brothers and sisters. But what's happening is that they're at, to me, a lower level of consciousness. And at a lower level of consciousness, they act in a very tribal way. And so they decide, these are American soldiers. They're our boys. Others, they're not. And they identify with the Israeli tribe. And the Israeli tribe say, these people are the enemy. We must have revenge because we lost so many. Now they must lose so many. The whole thing is tribal. And it's a loop that we have lived with for generations. It's a loop that has caused world wars and conflicts for generations. And we have got to get out of that loop. And the current leadership in the world is clearly stuck in a kind of dinosaur consciousness. And all the spiritual teachers in the world, anyone that has got any credibility, will spot straight away that this is the case. Here's another example. The US leadership, UK leadership, lots and lots of people talk about Gaza and how there needs to be a 2-state solution. And that's the answer. And we've seen senior members of the parliament here talking about, officially, basically pushing for this idea of recognising that Palestinians deserve their own state. It hasn't happened, and it's probably never going to happen. And they know it. The politicians know it. And they have incredible examples of very similar patterns. So it's not surprising that in other places in the world we see similar sorts of conflicts. So take, for example, Northern Ireland. 2 different religions, Protestant, Catholic. Protestants pro-Britain and want to be identified as British, as the Union, part of the Union, the UK. Irish Catholics who want to be identified as Republicans, part of the Republic of Ireland. Lots of tragedy. Murder, killing, fighting, aggression, discrimination going on. You could talk about it for hours, and I'm sure you would shed a tear at hearing the tough tragedy, the sadness of what has happened in that part of the world. But literally in the last few days, they have come to an agreement to start up their parliament again in PowerShare. So you have a region where people identify with different religions and want to be part of different nations coming together and agreeing to PowerShare. Through a very clever peace process where there's clear legislation and rules about how the process works, the governing structure, the political structure, how the parliament works, making sure people have got, the rights, the respect for rights, and there's a fair, just democratic process. And I watched today the start of that parliament again. So the hypocrisy of this is that the leadership in the UK, people like Tony Blair, David Cameron, John Major, in the US, Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Obama, they've all been intimately aware and involved with this process. So there was always a solution for the problems that occur in these places where you have religious and tribal nationalist kind of conflict. You couldn't have had a two-state solution in Northern Ireland because basically you'd have ended up with enclaves of people living in different places with big walls between their housing estates, the economy, the networks of roads and everything. In many ways, just like what's happening in the Middle East with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And there's no reason whatsoever why you couldn't have had a single state with really good, democratic, empowered representation from all the communities so that they could all live together. I mean, how many Palestinians have to work in Tel Aviv or in Israel to make a living? They're already interconnected because of the location and where they are. I'm not saying it would be the same, but common threads, fundamentally common threads. You see exactly the same thing with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Again, a region of people who are pro-Europe and want to be seen as European, a region of people who are much more pro-Russia and want to be Russian. And the difficulty within that society about what do you do, and for the political system, what do you do? But again, it's all solvable. You having regional parliaments with strong respect for, the Ukrainian heritage, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian language, and at the same time Russian culture, language, and so on, building strong relationships between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. The Europeans and the Russians working together to make sure that they're supporting the Ukraine government and so on. That hasn't happened. Again, all our politicians know about this. They know it. If you look at Ukraine on Fire, the documentary by Oliver Stone, there's actually two documentaries that I've linked here. Just watch them and you'll see what has really gone on in those areas. What has really gone on. And it's a tragedy. And there's incredible hypocrisy. And I can only speak about the hypocrisy of the West because I don't live in China or Russia or any of these places. And I'm sure, just like us, just like me, I'm sure there's a dark side to these countries, and there's hypocrisy and there's brainwashing and there's manipulation and there's bullying going on. But in the UK and in the West and in the US, it's clear that there's an incredible amount of contradiction in what's going on that leads to major disaffection with politics and the loss of trust in the political system here. So the Northern Ireland example is just there, and it's really interesting. They managed, after 2 years, they managed to get the Parliament up and running again, talking with dialogue and coming to agreements. The other interesting one is the BBC. So I'm very careful which news medias that I look at and I listen to, because they're a lot of the time you can fall into this rabbit hole or trap of propaganda or your ego being triggered. They say something that you agree with and you think, oh, they must be correct, they must be right. So I'm always very careful to look at media organisations and where they're coming from and who's backing them and who's supporting them. And a lot of media organisations, when I've done a bit of research, I've had an aha moment where I've gone, of course. That's why they're constantly pushing one side of the story. So I'm not a huge fan of the BBC, but the BBC is an interesting organisation because it's a UK government-funded organisation, and the licence fee. So they have a licence fee, and people pay a licence to basically have the right to watch the BBC. What's interesting about this is that the BBC tends to be quite moderate and careful, and I can understand why. They're linked to the political system. They get their funding through government. The government of the day Labour or Conservative, has a lot of power when it comes to how that organisation is funded or what happens to it, because they can make legislation to change things. There's a lot of pressure on the BBC because the whole political agenda within the country, because, being involved in wars brings in this whole political propaganda, and the political propaganda tries to use the media to get the people on board. And the BBC is going to be call number one when it comes to any kind of story that relates to the rights and wrongs of any kind of military intervention. What's really fascinating about the BBC, and what I find it difficult to understand, is why they produced a kind of a short documentary about how the US has been funding mercenaries through the UAE to just murder all sorts of people. And they even interviewed the people, that were supposed to be murdered but managed to escape. I'm not going to go into detail because I put the link to the short documentary, but it is absolutely astonishing. Because this is not a crazy conspiracy theory organisation putting out this information. It's the BBC. What's even more crazy is when I've looked at Robert Oliver Stone's Ukraine on Fire, where he goes into great detail, as I mentioned, as I referenced earlier, about the causes and the startup of the war in Ukraine with Russia. When I go into the detail of just, listening to the very detailed evidence that the BBC report gives on American supported and funded mercenaries just killing people that basically are deemed to be, trouble. No justice, no court of any kind. When I look at these things, it kind of just, it breaks down any shred of confidence that I could possibly have in the Western motivations for going into wars. And that's not to say what they're doing is wrong. It's just that I no longer can believe anything they're saying. But also, they don't really challenge. If somebody called me a liar, or called me out and said, you want us to do this, but I saw you want us to be good, honest citizens, but I saw you steal a loaf of bread from that restaurant or from that bakery. I would want to respond, because I would want to have the respect, I would want to have the credibility, I would want to have the moral high ground so I could continue doing what I'm doing. But what astonishes me, how, majorly important people in the US who are, involved in the military, who are decorated war heroes, who have, haven't got a shred of conspiracy anywhere in their DNA, how they're just ignored. That you don't have a sudden aha moment where it's like, hold on, if this is true, we have got a serious problem, because the people who are getting involved in making wars are basically doing it they're not really, there's no credibility about how they're doing what they're doing. So we need to have a debate about this. We need to at least have a look at these things and say, hold on, let's have a look and see, is Oliver Stone telling the truth? Is this BBC documentary actually telling the truth? Is it fakery? Is it propaganda? But I think we need to have that conversation, because the problem is that getting ourselves involved in major conflicts in the world as a nation brings with it so many risks. The cost to our economy, because of the amount of money we have to spend on military. The potential lives lost. So the wars that we go into, the people that we have war with, the deaths of civilians, the deaths of children, the deaths of hundreds of thousands of other soldiers, the possibility that we as a nation will have to go into war. We've seen recently government ministers and officials sort of testing the waters here in the UK about conscription to fight these wars. And so it's really, really, really important that we feel that we can trust the information that we're getting. And I would put it to you that we can't. We just can't. And I've previously given you what I feel, after a lot of work, a lot of analysis, are people that I think have some sort of credibility when it comes to giving us any kind of information that would have an ounce of truth to it. Jeffry Sachs, Mearsheimer, I think Oliver Stone with his documentaries, and now this BBC documentary. I've listed them all for you to watch, so you can make your own mind up. Kind of many ways I've done the legwork. I've looked at all these different media outlets, and there's loads more that are really good. But these particular ones, these particular people in these particular reports, documentaries, they really point to something which is really, really, really important. And that is, unfortunately, the approach that the West is taking to major military conflicts in the world, we as citizens cannot trust what they're doing. We just can't. And the implications are, for us, that we kind of involuntarily sign up to being part of this. When our nation goes out and starts a war or gets involved in a war with another country, we're kind of part of it. And then, of course, there's the implications for us. So, I really think it's really important for me to be able to provide you with some very legitimate, non-woo-woo, non-propaganda, non-conspiracy theory pieces of information that you can look at, and then you can start to basically make up your mind if what you think I'm saying might have a shred of truth to it. And that is that we cannot trust what we're being told when it comes to wars. The last thing I would say to you is the European Court of Justice, ICJ. I put on some videos recently showing the full hearings for Gaza, the Gaza-Israeli conflict, and South Africa in its case, and the Israeli case. And in the end, I put up the result, and there was the majority of judges agreed that there was potentially a case to be started with respect to genocide. Just look at the reaction of Western governments, Western politicians. They talk about a world order and world sort of rules of engagement and all that stuff, but they've kind of really abandoned all of it. The very court that is part of the process of the sort of global democracy, the Western global democracy, that very court basically made a statement, and really it has fallen on deaf ears with respect to the Western media. What's even more interesting is that that same court is dealing with cases taken by Ukraine against Russia. The judges haven't changed. The leading judge is American. And it's just really interesting to see what's going on there. There's two cases. One is a genocide case. The second is a case of accusation of terrorism against Russia. I've put information on that case on the link here, because I think, again, just watching this, you'll start to see that the propaganda that is so pervasive in our political system about Russia, about Ukraine, about Israel, about the Palestinians, none of it adds up. And it obviously doesn't add up. And we would need to be extremely silly and stupid to believe really anything that we're being told here. And the spiritualists, if they were getting involved, the great spiritual teachers who were to get involved and could say, okay, it is Maya, but within this Maya, within this game, we're all doing these things. Part of our purpose is to transcend the ego, to grow in consciousness. They would be saying, we're not going to take blame. We're not going to assign blame to anyone, because they're all stuck in ego, because they're all stuck in a certain level of consciousness. But in reality, they need to come out of that. They need to awaken out of it. And we can all help each other awaken by starting to get the pieces of information, the good quality, genuine pieces of information that alert us to the anomalies that we're seeing. And then, of course, using our power to just say no to people who lie to us. No to people who try to pull the wool over our eyes. No to people who try to deceive us. No to people who spread propaganda. Just no. Say, okay, I love you. We're all brothers, but I'm going to leave you. What you're doing in your way and your approach does not fit with my humanity, with my heart. It doesn't feel right. And the evidence I'm seeing and hearing tells me that I cannot trust what you're saying. And I understand you've got your traumas, you've got your anger, you've got your frustration. I understand that, but it's not the way forward. And I have to say goodbye. Thank you very much. And then we can start to bring in a completely new, more positive humanitarian approach to all our problems in the world. And then, of course, ultimately, we realize that we're one tribe, global tribe, and that we've got to work this way. Because if we don't, we will get thrown off. We will get thrown out. Nature will just, the system, amazing system that keeps, and the intelligence behind the system, it keeps this whole thing together, doesn't actually want to destroy what it has made. It wants it to keep growing and creating and flowering and expressing. And you can't do that. You cannot do that when you're stuck in a dinosaur tribalism, where fundamental principles of love, respect are not being adhered to. And not a word you can say can be trusted, because it's contradictory, because it doesn't fit together. That's what leads to major trauma and suffering for us all, and a repeating of the cycle. And I believe nature will say, of course, if you're not willing to take all of the wonderful gifts, the amazing scientific advances, the amazing technologies I've given you so you can get the information you need, you can see what's going on. If you're not willing to take these things and look at them and go, okay, now we need something different here. We need something better. We need something more trustworthy. Let's just get it. Let's do it. If we're not willing to do that, we'll just keep going through these loops. And potentially each time we go through the loop, it'll get more and more difficult for us until the shell is cracked open and we go, okay, I understand. Killing my brothers and sisters, whether it's in Israel or it's in Gaza or Yemen or anywhere else in Ukraine, the killing of brothers and sisters is just wrong, fundamentally wrong. War is a last resort, and we should have transcended our egos, and transcended our tribal survival nature to that point where we can go, okay, we need to work together here. We need to find ways to become that beautiful, singular tribe that's into thriving, that's into creating. And so, the example of Northern Ireland is a clear and beautiful example of communities just breaking out of that tribalism and doing things that all the other communities around the world that are at each other's throats because they don't agree with each other's gods, or because they're trying to take each other's resources, or they're trying to remain as the dominant power. They could learn so much from what's going on there. So I really urge you to have a look at those video links that I put on and let me know what you think. Am I crazy? Am I conspiracy theorist? How do you feel when you see the reporting from the BBC? When you see and listen to the detail about what has been happening, according to Oliver Stone, in Ukraine for a decade before that war started? How does it make you feel? Do you think, it's just more propaganda? Or do you think, gosh, I didn't know this? Is it true? Is there any legitimacy to this? And if there is, we've got a serious need to basically reevaluate who is giving us the information we're giving, and when we empower them to go off and load up a weapon and kill somebody. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in my next video.